Let me ask you something. If one of the most powerful militaries in the world decided to invade Iran tomorrow, what would actually stop them? Would it be Iran's missiles, its army, its alliances, or something much older, something that has been defending this land for thousands of years? The answer lies in a massive wall of rock stretching over 1,500 kilometers, the Zagros Mountains. And once you understand how these mountains work, you start to realize something very uncomfortable. Invading Iran is not just difficult, it might be one of the hardest military operations on Earth. Let's start with the basics. The Zagros Mountains run along western Iran, forming a natural barrier between Iran and Iraq. But calling them mountains does not do them justice. This is not a single ridge. This is a layered, jagged, chaotic system of ridges, valleys, choke points, and high ground that stretches from northwest Iran all the way down toward the Persian Gulf. And historically, this range has done one thing incredibly well. It has stopped armies. For centuries. Think about how most invasions happen. Armies prefer flatland. They need space for tanks. Logistics, supply lines, and coordination mountains destroy all of that. And the Zagros Mountains are particularly brutal. They are steep. They are narrow. They are unpredictable. And most importantly, they force any invading army into very specific limited routes. Which means one thing. You do not get to choose how you invade. The terrain chooses for you. Now here's where it gets interesting. If you look at Iran on a map, most of the traditional invasion routes come from the west through Iraq. And guess what? Sits right there, the Zagros. This mountain range has historically acted as a natural barrier between Mesopotamia and the Iranian plateau. Empires have tried to cross it. Some succeeded temporarily, but holding territory beyond it is where things fall apart, because crossing mountains is one thing. Sustaining an army inside them is a completely different nightmare. Let's break that down. First problem, logistics. In modern warfare, logistics is everything. Fuel, ammunition, food, medical support. All of it depends on roads. Now imagine trying to move a mechanized army through narrow mountain passes. One blocked road and your entire supply chain collapses. One ambush and your convoy is gone. And in the Zagros, there are very few roads and even fewer that can support heavy military movement. Second problem, visibility. In flat terrain satellites, drones and aircraft give you a massive advantage. But in mountains, everything changes. You lose line of sight. Enemy forces disappear behind ridges. Signals get disrupted, and suddenly the most advanced military technology in the world starts struggling against geography. Third problem, high ground. Whoever controls the high ground in a mountain war wins. And the defender always has the advantage. Iran does not need to move far. They already know the terrain. They can position forces above choke points. They can use elevation to control movement. And most importantly, they can force the enemy into predictable paths. And that brings us to one of the most dangerous aspects of the Zagros Mountains. Choke points. These are narrow passes where large armies have no room to maneuver. And historically, choke points are where invasions die because all it takes is a few well-placed units, some artillery, and complete knowledge of the terrain to turn an entire advancing force into a target. Now let's zoom out a bit. Because the Zagros Mountains do not exist in isolation, they are part of a much larger defensive system. Iran is essentially a natural fortress made up of mountains, deserts, and elevated plateaus. To the north, you have another mountain range. In the center, massive deserts. And in the west, the Zagros. Together, they create layers of defense, so even if you somehow cross the Zagros, you are still not done. Not even close. Now let's talk history. Because this is not just theory, we have seen this play out in real wars. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, Iraq had a massive advantage in terms of equipment and external support. But when the fighting moved into mountainous regions, everything slowed down. The terrain made conventional warfare extremely difficult and turned the conflict into a long, grinding war. And that is the key word here. Grinding mountains do not just stop invasions. They stretch them out. They exhaust them. they bleed them. And this is exactly why modern military analysts say something very important. Air power alone cannot win a war in Iran, because at some point you need boots on the ground, and the moment that happens, you are dealing with the Zagros. Even today, military planners understand this. Large-scale invasion scenarios often struggle with one simple reality. There are very limited entry routes into Iran through the west, and they all run into mountainous terrain, which means any invasion force becomes predictable, and predictability in war is deadly. But here is where things get even more interesting. The Zagros Mountains do not just defend Iran, they shape how Iran fights. Iran's military doctrine heavily relies on asymmetric warfare, which basically means do not fight the enemy where they are strongest. Fight them where they are weakest, and mountains are perfect for that. Small units ambush tactics, hit and run operations, guerrilla warfare. All of this becomes incredibly effective in mountainous terrain because the enemy cannot bring their full strength to bear. And we have already seen this in parts of the Zagros region. Groups operating in these mountains have used the terrain to survive against much stronger forces. The area is so rugged that even modern militaries struggle to fully control it. Now imagine that scaled across an entire country. This is why many experts believe that any invasion of Iran would turn into a long-term insurgency nightmare. Not a quick victory, not a clean operation, but a prolonged, costly conflict. Now let's address something important. Does this mean Iran is impossible to invade? No, but it does mean something else. It means that invading Iran would be incredibly expensive, slow and risky, because geography does not just defend Iran physically, it also creates strategic depth. Even if an enemy captures border regions, Iran can fall back, regroup, and continue fighting from deeper inside the mountains and plateau. And that changes everything, because now you are not fighting for a quick win, you are fighting a war of endurance. There is also a psychological aspect to this. Iran's geography has shaped its strategic thinking for centuries. The focus has always been protect the core control access points and make invasion as painful as possible. And the Zagros Mountains are at the center of that mindset. Even ancient empires understood this. The mountains have historically acted as boundaries between civilizations, between the Persian world and its Western rivals. And that has not changed, not even in the age of drones and satellites. Because at the end of the day, technology evolves. Weapons evolve, but geography does not care. A tank still struggles on steep terrain. A supply convoy still needs roads. An army still needs food, fuel, and coordination. And mountains still disrupt all of it. Now let's tie this into modern geopolitics. If a conflict involving Iran escalates, most likely it will begin with airstrikes, missile exchanges, and cyber warfare. But a full-scale ground invasion, that is a completely different story, because the moment boots hit the ground, the advantage starts shifting to Iran. Analysts consistently point out that Iran's geography makes large-scale ground invasion extremely difficult, favoring defense over offense, and that is why, despite decades of tension, there has never been a serious full-scale land invasion of Iran in modern times. It is not because Iran is untouchable, it is because the cost of invading it is simply too high. And the Zagros Mountains are a big part of that equation. So when people ask why has Iran not been invaded, they often look at politics or military strength or alliances. But the real answer is much simpler. Look at the map. Look at the terrain. Look at the Zagros. Because sometimes the most powerful defense system in the world is not built by humans. It is carved by nature. And in Iran's case, that defense system has been standing for millions of years. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like and subscribe, because we break down the hidden forces shaping our world, and trust me, some of the most important ones you cannot even see on the surface.